Hello, is this thing on? Hello there. Today I'm going to be ranking all pressure monsters based on how likely they would be to commit tax fraud. Now, I feel like only a few of these could actually get away with tax fraud, and so for the majority of them, I'll be ranking them based on how quickly they get captured. If they can evade capture forever, if they eventually get captured, or if they get captured immediately. So first off, we got Angler. I'm gonna say that Angler gets captured pretty quickly, considering that they're constantly emitting an EMP, constantly emitting an EMP field, which causes lights around it to flicker, and two, is constantly making an extremely loud scream, which would very easily help authorities to track it down. This also goes for Pinky, who still makes a scream. However, they don't flicker the lights, which I feel would allow it to much easierly escape. Then there's Frogger and Blitz. Now, Chainsmoker's an interesting story because while Chainsmoker does move kind of slow, I feel like their constant gas emissions, which teleport people to Paranoia's box, which instantly kills people, would allow it to actually evade capture. Now, you may notice I actually skipped over Mirage, because I feel like Mirage can get away with tax fraud. They won't be able to get away with it, I mean, but they won't get captured, is what I feel like. Because, like, for one, while they do flicker the lights, which can be a hazard, they can turn off their sound. And for some reason, I feel like with the Trolldom Mirages, they flicker the lights, but they do it intentionally and can just not. Pandemonium. Now, if Pandemonium was able to remain submerged in a near hydrothermal vent, that means that Pandemonium lives underwater primarily, however, is also capable of breathing oxygen. This means that I feel Pandemonium would be able to hide underwater. And with the amount of weird stuff underwater, or in the deep sea ocean, I feel like Pandemonium would do just fine. Now, the good people. It depends on who's wearing the mask, kind of, but not really. Because if you have someone who's actually. Now, the way I'm ranking this is someone commits tax fraud and then puts on the mask. Yeah, that's what I'm gonna go with. And so I feel like they would eventually get captured. Because they can fight off the initial horde of police, because when you wear the mask, you get turned into this thing, I feel. And, you're able to just kill the police. However, eventually, it's gonna get too much, and you're gonna get captured. Painter is Painter is an AI program, and if Painter can just casually figure out how to set up turrets all around the entire black site, take control over that highly monitored system, and also figure out the natural resonant frequency that immediately makes the PDG detonate, I feel like Painter would be able to commit tax fraud. Non-enraged infestation would get immediately captured, as they're pretty easy to just look away from. Enraged infestation would take a bit longer to get captured, and outrage infestation, I feel like they wouldn't be able to get captured. Because, let's be real, the majority of people can't survive outrage infestation. Now, squiddles can't write, meaning they can't file their taxes, and thus cannot commit tax fraud. Actually, I may have to add that as a... squiddles here. I'll change the color. The puddles of void mass are just a child compared to the actual vacuole of void mass, And since children could not file taxes, they could not commit tax fraud. Wall dwellers, while they can't write, I feel like they would still figure out a way to commit tax fraud, as the entire strategy of a wall dweller is extremely intelligent. They camouflage themselves to blend in with walls and sneak up behind unsuspecting people. For the most part, it works. And if they eventually get figured out, they can just stay hiding on the wall forever. Now, Redeemer. I'm counting both the gun and the thingy as the same, so they're both going to be counted as Redeemer, even though maybe in the game that it comes from, they're different. Whatever the case, I feel like this floating thing would do the tax fraud. However, they would get captured pretty quickly because it's pretty easy to just run up, grab a gun. And sure, you may have. On second thought, since it's really difficult to transport the gun anywhere, since if the gun gets touched by anyone, you enter the minigame, but then the gun fades away. You can see that this video is extremely scuffed because I'm changing these in real time. Now for the candle bearers. Hold on. Just... The candle bearers are a pretty mixed bag because if it's like all of them, then it may be difficult. However, the candle bearers do have a vital weakness, and that's they can't be exposed to light. Now, if you do shine light at them, sure, they would get angry at you. But they can't exactly fight the sun, can they? So I'll say that authorities will be initially unable to capture them, so they'll have to wait till daytime. Candle brutes will be captured a lot quicker due to their much larger size. The lamels is a creature that lives naturally at swimming pool temperatures, or pressures, meaning that it would be a surface fish, and thus being in the ocean, it would be relatively close to the surface, and thus would be relatively easy to spot and eventually capture. Although the ocean is a big place, and the lamels, who I definitely did not spell their name wrong while getting the images for this, could easily fit into either of these two, but I feel like eventually authorities will be able to capture it. Now, the Divine is... If they're still in their natural habitat of the Amazon, then they would eventually get captured or immediately get captured. But if they're in the oxygen gardens, then that's completely different. Since the Divine are... The way I'm basing this is like they're in the real world. However, the Divine, at the very end, would always be fated to be in the oxygen gardens, as Urban Shade uses them as their primary source of oxygen. And thus, if authorities came down to try and arrest the Divine for tax fraud, they would have to deal with the entirety of Urban Shade forces. And I feel like a SWAT team would pale in comparison due to the military-grade void bullets that Urban Shade just has billions of. Vultus Luminara, also known as the Searchlights. The Searchlights, they're a type of whale, which means they make whale noises, which are pretty loud, and their giant glowing searchlights are a pretty key indication that this is the searchlight. And thus authorities would be able to eventually locate at least one Vultus Luminara instance in the ocean. A60, I feel personally that A60 would just hide out in the rooms, and slowly kill off any authorities that come to try and arrest A60. I'm basing this off of the original A60. There is no goal at A1000. The rooms just go on infinite. And authorities who would try to capture A60 would also have to deal with A200. And no matter what rooms you go off of, if you go off of rooms and doors, the authorities would die pretty quickly. If you go off of rooms indoors, authorities would also have to deal with A90 and A200. And I don't feel like the authorities would be able to eventually survive this, as Curious Light would just not be there. Or actually, Curious Light doesn't exist because this is pressure lore, and thus this is just an infinite office complex, which means A90 doesn't exist, but there is an A200. Now, the educator is a math teacher. Not only that, but he's a bald math teacher. This makes him inexplicably good at math. And I feel that with the educator's math prowess, that he can commit tax fraud. And even if he somehow fails, maybe he gets distracted by a rowdy student, his excellent hearing abilities would mean he'd never get captured, as he can tell where sound comes from and who makes it. I'm going off the presumption that the educator is Bali, of course. Even though the educator is legally distinct. Actually, you know what, that reminds me. My bad, I'm back. I got Runner and Ambuscade, who I completely forgot about. The man from the Mindscape can easily just vanish and may not even be real. So I'll put that he evades capture. Harbinger, I feel like they would be able to get away with tax fraud. I feel like Styx would be able to easily evade capture due to the fact that in game we see that they have the ability to really quickly teleport. Unfortunately, our little boys sea bunnies, they aren't very intelligent, and as such would not actually be able to commit tax fraud. The imaginary friend is, well, imaginary, and thus exists outside our physical constructs of reality, and thus would not be bound to our laws, and thus would not be bound to taxes. Abstract art, I feel like when authorities arrive to arrest them, they'll walk past the art like, wait, no way this is our guy, surely. So they just keep on walking past. Number 30, Mr. Lopi, who was originally going to be the last until I remembered that the Graveyard existed, and then I remembered that Sebastian existed, and then I remembered that Legally Distinct Smoky Face and Legally Distinct Glitchy Face exists. Mr. Lopi would easily be able to commit tax fraud. As well as the bouncers. Mr. Lopi is just the type of guy who would be able to get away with tax fraud, and bouncers just give me that feel. Purely from a visual standpoint, though, since I kind of haven't played the Graveyard. Skelepede would pretty easily get captured. You just look in down sewers, look for the glowing lights. Pretty easy. The most difficult part of most of these is actually capturing it. Although with the help of modern technology, it's pretty easy. You just put it in a box. Sebastian would eventually get captured, but eventually, I used eventually for a reason. This can be like 1 to 2 days, 80 to 90 years. I feel Sebastian would be able to evade the authorities for a really, really long time, but would eventually get caught. Now I'm going off the presumption that this is just Rush. And indoors, the reason why the lights flicker is because it's guiding light giving us a warning that something's coming. I think. And Rush seems to scream, but that's because they're I don't know why they scream, actually. It's never explained. But I feel like they would eventually be able to get captured. Same thing goes with Ambuscade. And that's the tier list. I definitely did not forget anyone. And nothing of value was lost. Thanks for watching. Sorry this video is just like completely unscripted. I'm bored out of my mind. Both of my parents are sick and they can't take me to school, so I have literally nothing to do.